Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Today, I'm talking about Golden Age comics again. Quality Comics. Let's talk about them. So Quality Comics was, ironically, a comics publisher who didn't always publish quality comics. They were active in the Golden Age really early, 1937 all the way through 56, but almost all their comics were purchased from packagers like Eisner and Iger or Harry A. Chesler. Those were studios full of artists and writers that would make 6 to 8 page comic book stories and then sell them to publishers like Quality to fill up the pages of their anthology titles. That meant that there was a lot of experimentation for crazy characters that might take off. Today, I want to talk about two superheroes, both with utterly unique gimmicks. One was the Red Bee, and the other was the Whistler. Each character has a set of powers I can honestly say was not common, but one of the books could barely think of a way to force the powers into the story, and the other leaned on them to such an extent that it was implausible. Let's just start it all up. The Red Bee debuted in Hit Comics issue 1, and it hit newsstands in mid-April of 1940. And there we can see him. There's the new hero, Red Bee. And what I have to say is a pretty exciting cover by Lou Fine. He is one of the better artists of the Golden Age era. Red Bee appeared as a story in the anthology book for 2 years, all the way through issue 24, then just disappears. And while he wasn't on the cover a lot, when he was, it looked cool. Issue 5 is probably the best, just my opinion, but Fine illustrated a pretty exciting battle underwater. However, it's also clear that there was no reference for swordfish easily available in 1940, since it looks like it's also half tiger shark. But it looks cool, and that counts for a lot. The first story is credited to B.H. Apiary. Do you get it? B.H. Apiary. Beehive Apiary. Yeah, doesn't quite count as a joke since it's not really a pun, it's literally the name of where a bee lives. But it amuses me anyway. The writer was Tony Blum, born Audrey Bloom, who almost always wrote under a pen name because she was one of a literal handful of women who wrote comics in the Golden Age. A bit of a pioneer. And I'm like 90% sure that when she created the Red Bee, she was just riffing on the Green Hornet. She just changed the color and slightly changed the stinging insect. The Golden Age did not care about plagiarism at all. They cared about how many ideas you could come up with in a day. If you pitched Ratman, the Lone Cowboy, and Captain Punch before quitting time, you got paid. This story begins with a mob of citizens protesting at City Hall, and the caption says they're sick of the grafting from the politicians. That's how you know it's fiction. Instead of wearing a hat with the mayor's name on it, they're actually upset that the politicians are using political office to enrich themselves. Can you imagine? The hero of the story is a lawyer named Rick Raleigh, and he decides to leak news to the press that the district attorney is ready to crack down on rackets. Rick is the assistant district attorney. Instantly, some thugs show up at their offices, but Rick has changed into his Red Bee outfit and punch them out. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you actually want an origin or even a motivation? Yeah, you're not going to find any of that in Red Bee's 24 stories. He just decided to put on tights and a shirt with apparently see-through plastic sleeves. Maybe it was popular in 1940. And he goes around punching gangsters. No mention of when he trained to get good at fighting or why he feels he isn't doing enough as an assistant district attorney, or even why he wanted to dress up this way and call himself Red Bee. I've seen some weak motivations in Golden Age comics, but this is at the top. He doesn't even say, someone needs to push back on crime. This comic trusts the audience to assume, yeah, things are bad out there, anyone would do this if they could make a costume. Red Bee confronts the mayor, who pulls a gun on him. But here's where Red Bee shines. You see, he keeps a bee in his belt for situations like this. A single, solitary bee. It stings the mayor, which allows Red Bee to step forward and beat him up. Oh, by the way, the story is now over, just 3 pages in. And this story is then repeated for every single other Red Bee story. He never goes up against anyone with superpowers, just gangsters and corrupt politicians. He does once fight a guy that puts on a Grim Reaper costume, but then the guy instantly ditches the costume after getting stung, and Red Bee just ends up fighting a guy that looks like a grumpy farmer. There is one story, though, that's my favorite. It starts with criminals blowing up train tracks and causing milk shipments to be destroyed, as well as obviously killing a lot of passengers. When Red Bee goes to investigate, he finds men on a remote farm coloring water white with a plan to sell fake milk. Ultimately, he destroys the fake milk plant and punches out the criminal mastermind. It's all explained in the second to last panel as Red Bee declares, "Yes, DJ Hammond, president of Dairyton Milk, you were going to sell this fake stuff for milk, weren't you? Your mob wrecked the real supply to open the market." Thank God we had a man with one single bee in his belt to stop these men from destroying the railroads so that they could flood the market with fake milk. That poor bee, it must be getting bounced all over the place while Red Bee runs around and jumps and punches people. Tough life. Red Bee never really has to leave the city or train a sidekick or even get a girlfriend. There's no love interest. It's just story after story of him hearing about someone corrupt and punching them. The end. Repeat for 2 years. Red Bee never gets a romantic interest unless we count his boss, the district attorney. Because in issue 10, Rick and his boss have a nice dinner together. In issue 14, they go sailing. And in issue 16, Rick just spends the weekend at his boss's nice cottage. I sincerely think that there's a chance, it's just a chance, but there's a chance that the writer had it in her head that Red Bee happens to be gay. He never shows any interest in women, and that's fine. But his boss also never gets a name. As late as issue 20, the opening splash page showing the characters in the book that week just lists the guy as the district attorney. Character growth? Yeah, maybe in the Silver Age, buddy. We've got 30 more comics to make before lunchtime. Oh, by the way, Red Bee has named the bee that he keeps in his belt. It's named Michael. Sometimes he talks to Michael. Here, he tells Michael, "Good work, Michael. You deserve a daisy for this." And over here, he says to the bee, "What? Michael? You know where the secret panel is?" There's no evidence that he can literally communicate with bees, so I think Red Bee has lost his mind. He probably thinks his bee hates Mondays and loves lasagna. However, Red Bee seems to have trained his bee since he sometimes asks Michael to follow someone. But Michael really can't do that much. Sometimes he stings people, so I assume that means he's a bumblebee or maybe a carpenter bee. Honeybees can only sting once and then their stinger falls off and they die. I doubt Red Bee is training multiple bees and calling them all Michael, but of course that is possible. Anyway, mostly Michael the bee just shows up for one brief scene in each story to either sting someone with a gun or distract them. The villains are always, always, always terrified of a bee. They panic. They jump into the ocean to escape. They crash their cars and even their airplanes, all because of the threat of being stung. I've been stung by bees. It's really not that big a deal. If you're not allergic, it doesn't hurt that much. I remember one time I had a job where I was selling cars, and we took the car that I was about to sell back to get cleaned up. And the people that were going to do the car wash and vacuuming and everything, they were like, there's a little wasp's nest on the back tailgate. And so I went back to see how big it was. It's pretty small, so I just pulled it off and threw it into the woods. And I got a sting. It wasn't that bad. It let me complete the deal instead of, telling the customer, oh, you have to come back after we get an exterminator to pull this off. It's not that big a deal, except to these villains. There is one single story where Red Bee has 3 bees. Red Bee is tied up to a chair, so he releases the 3 bees and asks them to bring him a razor blade to cut himself free. And then they actually do. But that's it. Most of the stories are Red Bee just getting into fistfights and contorting himself into increasingly unlikely positions. Michael the Bee becomes an afterthought by issue 5. The concept of a guy saving the world with bees is honestly kind of a fun one, but these comics don't push it into the surreal or the absurd like they should. If you want a good superhero story of a man solving and also creating problems with bees, I strongly recommend checking out my pal Harry Partridge's cartoons called Dr. Bees.
Dr. Bees! Here comes Dr. Bees in the Bee-mobile!
A single minute of those has about 100 more ideas than all 24 issues of the Red Bee comics. But this was an example of a single idea that the author didn't do much with. Now, let's go to one with an equally dumb power that is portrayed as incredible. Once more, I give you what you want, Internet. I present to you The Whistler. National Comics issue 48 was published by Quality Comics, not National Comics, in April of 1945. But when Quality Comics went out of business in the 50s, they actually sold most of their superheroes to DC Comics, who originally were known as National Comics in the 30s. None of that is relevant to the story of The Whistler. The Whistler's splash page shows us that he dresses up exactly like the Spirit, and while he punches out 2 criminals, actually, presumably they're criminals and not like guys in front of him in line at the grocery store. I hope he's not a jerk like that. The blurb tells us that we will, quote, learn his weird secret weapon against the tycoons of crime. Secret weapon. I'm gonna guess, I know this is a stretch, but I'm gonna guess that secret might just be whistling. You might have given that one away with the title, folks. With a name like The Whistler, I don't think his secret skill is going to be going around on a unicycle or squirting milk out of his eyeball. We're shortly introduced to Mallory Drake, a reporter hitting up editor Mac Shane for work. Mac is kind of like an early J. Jonah Jameson. He's always angry and hates superheroes. Mac hires Mallory and then absolutely freaks out because Mallory kissed him and leaves with a swish. I'm not sure how much we should read into that sound effect. Mallory runs to tell his older brother about the good news. Jerry Drake is performing at a club as the world's greatest whistler. Jerry introduces Mallory to the club manager as an even better whistler than himself. Keep in mind, whistling is very, very important in the world of The Whistler. If you think it's hard for writers of, say, Green Arrow to come up with a way for him to solve a crime with an arrow every story, just imagine how much tougher it would be to solve crimes with whistling every time. It's important to set up that everyone in this world really admires whistling. Just then, some gangsters show up to strong-arm the club manager into letting them run gambling out of his club. When he protests, along with the Drake brothers, one thug hits Mallory. Jerry stands up for him, so the gangsters just shoot him right there in the club. As Jerry lays dying, he says to his brother, "Remember, once you whistled 3 notes, made shivers run down my spine. Scariest sound I ever heard. Use that whistle. Scare criminals. Pay them back." Ugh. Drop everything, folks. It is an actual origin story in a Golden Age comic. Mallory has motivation to get revenge on crime. They killed his brother. Although I'm not sure I trust the fevered words of a dying man as good advice on how to fight crime. Poor Jerry died remembering the time his brother terrified him with a whistle. But there you go. Mallory has an ability to do scary whistles. And in the 1940s, that was more than enough to count as justification for becoming a vigilante. Mallory stealthily flips through a book in a dark office and finds the address of the crime boss. What detective work is this? Oh, he's just reading through the phone directory, presumably at home. Well, good thing the crime boss keeps his address publicly available. Mallory has also started calling himself the Whistler to an empty room, so that's what I'm going to keep calling him from this point forward. Whistler shows up at the crime boss's estate and whistles at a passing guard. The guard pauses to say that it's a creepy sound, and Whistler punches him out, then commenting that Jerry was right. The whistle paralyzes them for a moment. And then he whistles outside of crime boss Flynn's window, scaring the gangsters so badly they start sweating. I am absolutely fascinated trying to imagine a whistle of 3 notes that could be that scary. Something tells me that if you played the soundtrack to a modern horror movie, these 1940s gangsters would react with explosive diarrhea. Their poor hearts just could not handle something that intense. From there, Whistler jumps in and just punches everyone out. And then the police show up, and apparently the men are still so scared that they roll over and tattle on their boss. Cut to Mallory reporting the story to the paper, and we see that he wears the exact same suit to work, just minus the red domino mask. He probably needs to sell a few stories to buy a different outfit. And you might think that a whistle that scares people could get old. And you'd be right. So, future stories have him do new things with his whistling. The next story involves the absolutely terrifying idea of someone sabotaging a roller coaster, and we see dozens of riders plummet to their horrible end. Even though Mallory is a crime reporter and would be completely justified showing up to investigate as part of his job, he opts to show up as the Whistler and surmises someone would want to ruin the park that stands to gain financially. Then the owner of the land that the theme park is on gets the drop on Whistler. With a gun to his back, Whistler unveils his new ability. Like a ventriloquist, the Whistler makes his eerie trademark seem to come from the bushes behind. Yes, he can now throw his voice, which distracts Anson, the landowner, long enough for Whistler to clobber him. But then a new shadowy figure with a gun emerges. But now Whistler, of course, whistles, which apparently is so loud the killer has to raise his hands to cover his ears, and now he's vulnerable, he gets knocked out. Turns out, the theme park owner is the villain. He wanted his own park to go bankrupt so that he could break his lease. Something about how he wanted to allow gambling on it, but couldn't per the terms of his existing lease, so if he broke his lease, some gangsters would set him up with a new plot of land. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but now Whistler can freeze people, distract them by throwing his whistle, or whistle so loud it hurts people's eardrums, and it's about to get even better. Mallory decides to see a violin performance, but the talented man is shot dead from a gun within the orchestra. The police arrest Igor, the kettle drum player, who swears that he's innocent, but runs away, diving through a window. Later, Whistler investigates and subdues a man in the dark who turns out to be Igor. Igor protests that he noticed something wrong and he's innocent. Igor shows Whistler that his drum had been nailed down to the floor, which he noticed because it sounded off. The men look inside the drum and see that a pistol has been arranged inside the drum, and it was nailed down so that it wouldn't move. It was aimed right at the violinist. Whistler sends Igor to get the police and remains behind, but gets knocked out. When he reawakens, it's revealed that the violinist's manager killed him out of jealousy. The manager shows that he has a device that will make the pistol shoot, so the violinist set the gun off himself, and Igor was set up to take the fall. The manager reveals that shortly he's going to talk to the police downstairs so that he has an alibi, and the gun will go off again, killing Whistler, and Igor will take the blame. But here's where Whistler's amazing powers come into play. He whistles such a high note that it sets the gun off, shooting the evil manager in the back. I absolutely love that the comic even took an extra panel to build up the tension. We're shown Whistler getting ready and told, "Suddenly the Whistler's lips purse, and from them comes a thin, high note." Remember how Jones in the Police Academy movies was always making people think that they were surrounded by an army?
Helicopters ahead. Throw down your weapons, put up your hands, and come out of this cave.
Or maybe that they were actually farting their own pants.
And I quote you directly, sir, when I say...
And he did that just by making silly sounds. Well, imagine if he could only make one sound, and he did it all the time to freeze people and set off guns. The Whistler is absolutely amazing. I love it. The next two stories in a row involve the angry newspaper editor and a police captain trying to lure the Whistler into a trap to get a news story and clear the way for the police to look better. Both stories involve Whistler turning off the lights and throwing his whistle so that they think that they missed getting him. Two of the same stories in a row. Fun story, though. The final one involves a gangster intimidating a jury, so Whistler goes after him and freezes them in their tracks with his scary whistling. There was one final Whistler story where he's tracking down a serial killer. The killer actually manages to hit Whistler in the face with a gate, which swells his lips and means that he won't be able to use his powers. But then just a couple pages later, he's all better, and he's able to use his powers in a slightly new way when he hypnotizes a snake. When the killer attacks, Whistler doesn't rely on his whistling. Instead, he just stabs him in the chest. And that was it for the Whistler. 7 stories. And the last 3 aren't as good as the first 4. But also, how do you top setting off a gun with your whistling? The Whistler had so much more potential. He had conflict with his boss and the police. He had a weird power, an actual motivation to go after criminals. But somehow, he only got 7 stories, and the Red Bee ended up with 24 of pretty much the exact same story repeated again and again. This is part of what fascinates me about Golden Age comics. Almost all the comics were anthologies, so it was very tough for the publishers to know which comics were the ones that readers enjoyed the most and which ones weren't as good. So sometimes the weirder ones went on way longer than they should have. I hope you enjoyed this look at 2 Golden Age weirdos. And if you've got a weird superhero that you think I should take a look at, let me know in the comments down below if there's somebody that I should cover. And until I see you next time, you know what I'm going to say. Keep reading comics. He has just decided to put on shirts. Let's try that again. Showing the characters in the book just I stuttered.